Hi everyone, my name is Dr. Melissa Estavillo. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and owner of Biltmore Psychology and Counseling. Today we wanted to touch on some family therapy topics, be able to answer some questions that people have had about how family therapy is different from individual therapy, and most importantly today what we wanted to touch on is how do I know if my family is dysfunctional? So many people fear that as they're looking at their family, they're going to identify that there's some patterns or behaviors that haven't been functional. I think it's important to be able to identify that with many of these things, there's gradation of severity, and there might be a place and a line where we would say, gosh, that's considered abusive. But I know that that can be scary for a lot of people to feel like, what if I identify that my family is abusive? Well, I want to scale it back a little bit and say, hey, again, in this range, we find that sometimes families are dysfunctional. It might not be on the abusive side, but a lot of the patterns that they're developing really don't serve them, and we want to be able to highlight some of those that happen pretty frequently. So one of the first ones that we see is a dysfunctional pattern is that people will deny responsibility for hurtful behavior. So it is really healthy when a family member makes a mistake to be able to own that mistake and say, I'm sorry for that, and be able to grow. But it's not uncommon in a dysfunctional family for people to say, that's not my fault, I'm not taking any responsibility for that, that's not my issue. And that can be really hurtful for a lot of families. Another one that we see is that family members can use intimidation to maintain power. So within a healthy family, there might be structure in terms of control, right? That the parents are at the top, preschool kids are down below, but that responsibility isn't used in this sense that there's power and coercion and people feeling like they're lesser than and people feeling like they're more important. So when that power is used as intimidation, where people feel afraid, where people feel on edge, where people are nervous that they're going to mess up, that doesn't create a safe environment for a lot of people within the family. And so that's one of those types of dynamics that needs to change to move the family from a place of dysfunction to a place of health. The third one that's important to note is that some family members are held as more important and other ones are held as less important. So kind of what we just touched on a second ago. It's hard when it feels like the firstborn son, for example, has the most power and the most prestige within the family. And it's not that each child is loved exactly the same and has the same place in the family, but it feels like one is up higher and the rest are then down below. And that gap in care and that gradation of care really does create a lot of distress within families and creates insecurities and people not really feeling equally valued and loved. Another one that's important to note is that reality can be very difficult to discern, meaning that in dysfunctional families, there's a lot of manipulation, there's a lot of denial of people's experiences, and then as a result, can often leave people feeling like they don't have a firm sense of what's happening. So they learn not to trust their gut. They learn to say, well, I guess that wasn't that big of a deal, or I guess that person was doing it because they loved me, when in reality, that person's gut was totally right, and that wasn't healthy, and that wasn't okay, and what was done to them was not something that should be continued. But when someone feels like they can't really discern what's happening within the family, that's a sign of dysfunction. The fifth one is that victims are made responsible for abusive behaviors. So we have seen for a long time in that cycle of domestic violence that oftentimes in that evaluation of the abusive behavior, someone will say, well, you made me mad, like you made me do it. And so the victim is then made responsible for the behavior instead of the person that's made the mistake being able to own it, grow from it, change from it. Instead, they're placing that behavior on someone else, or a parent that gets mad at a child and says like, well, you spilled. Well, yes, those are frustrating situations, but blaming that child for that aggressive response is dysfunctional and not healthy within a family. A sixth one is that a parent is often deceptive. So many families like to portray themselves well, right? They have a clean house, they have children that are orderly, they have things that are in control, and it really creates this gap between the public appearance and then what's actually happening behind closed doors. And that can be really difficult for people because they feel like they need to present really well, and really to the community, no one would know that there's maybe dysfunctioning happening. But that also creates a place where then family doesn't have to grow and change because it's really not shown to anyone else. It's really kept hidden and secret, like I said, behind closed doors. The seventh is that there's no straightforward and healthy communication. So there's often places, again, where it feels like it's manipulative, or people are talking in circles, or both people are trying to be heard at the same time. but there's not a de-escalated sense that every person's concerns and feelings matter and that there's space to be able to hear all of that. And while there might be disagreement, there's still love and respect for that person. That is often absent in dysfunctional families, but it feels like there's about an emphasis on power and coercion and winning the argument and being right. And a lot of that doesn't create a place, like I said, of warmth and safety. An eighth one is that healthy emotions aren't valued. It's wonderful to be happy. It's wonderful to be positive, but at the end of the day, humans have quite a range of emotions, and there's many of those that are healthy that should be valued and prized. So, it's not fun to feel anxious or afraid or embarrassed or disappointed, but in healthy families, those emotions are tolerated. Those emotions are appreciated and empathized with, and there's connection in those hard feelings to be able to move that person through. But in dysfunctional families, there's really a sense that, it's either a sense of power and anger or just denial of emotions and happiness. And that flat environment can really be painful for people because denial of emotions doesn't make it go away. It just means that they can't be expressed and shared. And the very last one that I wanted to highlight is that many dysfunctional families have poor boundaries. So boundaries are something that keep the good people in and keep the bad people out. And boundaries also allow us to be able to have healthy emotions and desires and dreams and goals. But within an unhealthy family, there's often a sense of maybe what the parent wants, that child has to do that, so, saying this is where you're going to college and this is what you're going to major in, and not allowing that place to be able to have a discussion. There can be a rigidity within the family and feeling like, we want you to marry this type of person, and if you marry someone different than what we anticipated, then we don't have that ability to flex and open up and allow those people in. Some poor boundaries are on the other end of the continuum where they relax. Anything goes, there's not really an expectation, everything's very permissive, but that doesn't also create the kind of stability that a lot of kids and family members need. So having healthy boundaries is paramount to a family being healthy, and dysfunctional families will lack a lot of that. So one of the big things that we talk about is that while these are signs of dysfunctional family, know that for many families, these don't have to stay that way. That family counseling can address some of these concerns, can change the pattern of communication and overcome some of these long-standing difficulties. So we love, questions like this. We want to be able to answer more like this and be able to talk about what some of our therapists often do with people that are in this place of distress. If you have any questions, you can always leave those in the comments below. And subscribe for future content if you want to hear more of these kinds of topics. Thank you again today. And again, if you're identifying some of this within your family, know that this doesn't have to stay this way and there is hope for that to change. Thank you.